Likutei Sichos, Chelik Chaf, Volume 20, the third Sicha for Parshas Chayei. This Sicha will explain the greatness of the tefillah, the prayer of Eliezer, the servant of Avrohom, which is discussed at length in our Parsha, and also we'll come to appreciate the power of prayer and how, so to speak, one can boost that power. As a quick introduction, just to familiarize ourselves with some of the concepts or anecdotes that are mentioned in the Sicha to help us flow through the Sicha. So we have in our week's Parsha, this week's Parsha that is, in our Parsha, we have the story with Eliezer. In short, Eliezer was sent by Avrohom Avinu to find a wife for his son Yitzchak. And then when he comes there to the outskirts of the city, he comes to the well and he makes a prayer and he says to Hashem, please, if the right person should come, and he gave the signs that he's looking for, and it says, and here is the crucial verse for our Sicha, Vayihi hu terem kila ledaber. Before he even completed speaking, before he even finished his prayer, and behold, Rivka was coming out, and he noticed the water rise up to her, and so on. Then we have the story with Moshe Rabbeinu. Fast forward many years, there was an uprising. If you recall, his cousin Korach complained and tried to make a coup against Moshe Rabbeinu, complaining that Moshe was not really a genuine prophet. And then Moshe, when he came there, and there was a final showdown, and Moshe Rabbeinu prayed to Hashem, and he said that if indeed Hashem will create, so to speak, make a new supernatural thing, and the ground will open up, in other words, something extraordinary will happen, and this will prove to all that I indeed am the messenger of Hashem, that you indeed sent me to be the prophet to all the people. And as soon as he completed his prayer, notice, as soon as he finished his prayer, the ground opened up. And Korach and his entire family got swallowed into the ground. Fast forward another many years, and you have the story with Shlomo HaMelech. Shlomo HaMelech builds the first Beis HaMikdash. And they're all waiting in great anticipation, but the Shekhinah didn't show itself. And Shlomo HaMelech made a prayer. And in this prayer, he asked for Hashem to reveal himself, to bring the Shekhinah down in a vivid and actual, obvious manner. As he finished praying, I should say after he finished praying, suddenly the fire came down from the heavens and it consumed all the korbanos that were there, and with this everybody knew that indeed the Shekhinah is there. Another few things to familiarize ourselves with. We know that in the Beis HaMikdash there was overt nisim, meaning one was actually able to see, to feel the miracles that took place there. For example, if you look in the 5th chapter of Pirkei Avos, it describes over there the 10 miracles that happened to our ancestors in the Beis HaMikdash, in and around the Beis HaMikdash. So every time they came for the pilgrimage, they came to be seen, but they also came to see. And there they absorbed godliness. It was so obvious, it was so clear that Hashem is present and prevalent in everything. Also, Makom ha'arayin einay min hamidah. In the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies, stood the Arayin, the Ark. The Ark had a very finite dimension. The Torah prescribes exactly how big it should be. And it had to conform to that in order to be the Ark. But yet, when they placed it in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, in the Holy of Holies, if they were to measure from one wall to the Ark, and then from the Ark to the other wall, it seemed as if it was not there. So it was the impossible of the impossibilities. Meaning it was there, but it wasn't there. And that was a great sign of godliness, where it's there, but you don't really see it. It's there and it's not there. Another thing about the Beis HaMikdash that you should be familiar with, once the Beis HaMikdash was built in Yerushalayim, on Har HaMoriah, on Temple Mount, the Kedusha, the holiness, remains forever. Even now, when the Beis HaMikdash, unfortunately, is not standing in its full glory, yet that site is holy. That site is permeated with Kedusha. Kedusha eino zazim im koima. Kedusha does not move from its place, quote unquote. One more thing. What did Matan Torah, what did the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai affect? We know that even prior to Matan Torah, going back all the way to Avrohom Avinu and Sarai Menu, it says our matriarchs and patriarchs observed the entire Torah, even before it was given. So what changed? They were privy to all the mitzvahs. What exactly transpired? What exactly changed at Matan Torah? Well, the Chazal tell us in the Medrash that prior to Matan Torah, there was a divide. There was, quote, a decree which separated Elyonim and Tachtonim, the upper realm and the lower realm, meaning the spiritual and the material. They could not mix, they could not blend. You cannot fuse them together. Post Matan Torah, Hashem came down on Mount Sinai and took away that Gzeda, took away that decree, removed that divide, and now the Kedusha can permeate even the lowest parts of the world. In fact, that's what the objective is, that the highest level of Kedusha, the highest level of holiness, comes all the way down and permeates the very lowest levels in the world. Let's get into the Sicha. So on the pasuk where it says, "Vayihu terem kilam davar," even before he completed saying his prayer, and behold, Rivka came out. It says in the Medrash quotes the saying of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, quote, "There are three who were answered immediately. They were answered as soon as they spoke." Who are these three? Eliezer, the servant of Avrohom, as we just quoted the verse. Moshe Rabbeinu, as I mentioned in the introduction, with the story of Korach, where it says in the verse, "Vayehi kechaloisei ledaber." It was as soon as he completed speaking, as soon as he ended his prayer, and the ground opened up. And then by Shlomo HaMelech, by the inauguration and dedication of the Beis HaMikdash, it says, "O kechlois Shlomo lehispalo." And when kechalois Shlomo lehispalo, when Shlomo completed praying, and suddenly the fire came down. Now it would seem that these three are unique. What makes them unique? Because, in other words, what connects these three? Because all three of them were answered for their prayers, meaning they were answered immediately after prayers. But that tells us that there must be some unique connection between these three people. In other words, there's something that unites them. They're not the only three people that their prayers were answered. So this is telling us something, that Eliezer, Moshe, and Shlomo have some unique quality that unites them. However, this is difficult to accept, because really, what is the question? What is the connection between the three that is unique? There's a unique connection, a unique correlation. And another thing, if you really examine, if you really look closely, it seems obvious that from the three, Eliezer is the greater one. Eliezer is the lead. Why? Because by Moshe and by Shlomo, the pasuk clearly states that when were they answered? When were their prayers fulfilled? After they completed praying. Whereas by Eliezer, it says explicitly, terem kila ledaber, even before he completed his prayer, even before he finished speaking, and already he was answered. So therefore, it cannot be because of their personalities that they have something special and unique in common, these three. But rather, says the Rebbe, this compels us to come to the conclusion that the connection, the uniqueness over here, is not so much in the people, Eliezer versus Moshe versus Shlomo, or all three of them together, but rather the uniqueness is in the prayer. And this is what brings all these three together. How will we understand this? As the Rebbe will explain it by first introducing or prefacing an explanation in halachos in the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva, in the laws of Tshuva, he explains the following. If you look in chapter 7, Halacha Vav, he says, Teshuvah is so powerful that it brings close those who are distant. Why? The Baal Tshuva, says the Rambam, quote, yesterday, meaning not too long ago, he was despised before Hashem. He was basically disgusted before Hashem. And now, because of his tshuva, he is beloved, he is cherished, and he is close, and he's like a good friend, so to speak, to Hashem. That's what the Rambam says in Halacha Vav. In the next halacha, the next paragraph, the Rambam says the following. There he describes how great a Baal Tshuva is, And he says, Kama ma'ula hatshuva. How great, how elevated is the idea of tshuva. Again, he says, this person yesterday was separated, was distant from Likutei Yisrael, from the God of Israel. And if he would cry out to Hashem, he would not be answered. And now, because of his tshuva, he is mudbak b'shchina. He is connected, he is cleaved to the Shechina. Says the Rambam, he tzayek v'nena miyad. He calls out to Hashem, and immediately he is answered on his prayers, on his requests. Now the question is, if you really look at these two halachas, these two paragraphs, he seems to be saying more or less the same thing. He's just explaining the tremendous accomplishment, the great advantage of tshuva. But he almost seems to be repetitive. He seems to be saying the same thing in both halachas. However, says the Rebbe, that's not the case. If you look closely, you take a closer examination, you'll find that he's speaking in two stages of halacha, two different levels. In the first halacha that we quoted, he speaks about getting close to the Shechina, meaning going from being totally distant to the Shechina, to Hashem's presence, to getting closer. Whereas in the next halacha, he takes it a step further. When one does tshuva at a much elevated level, one actually becomes davuk, mudbak. He becomes cleaving to the Shechina, almost like actually one. And this explains the difference. You see, the difference between the first halacha and the second one is, in the first halacha is, in terms of tefillah, of prayer, when one is just merely closer to Hashem, so there is a process. You're closer, Hashem listens to your prayers, Hashem hears your prayers, but it's almost like it has to go through almost a procedural cycle, where until the prayer gets answered. So there is somewhat of a delay. However, when someone prays to Hashem, says the Rebbe, and that's how the Rebbe applies it here, and he's in a much elevated relationship with Hashem, namely, that he is like one, he is connected, he is davuk, he is cleaving to the Shechina, then it's, so to speak, as if he and Hashem are one, and therefore the tefillah is answered immediately. Immediately. Says the Rebbe, just like this concept is relevant to the person who's doing tshuva, namely that when you are connected with Hashem, when you are closer to Hashem, that much more, that you are actually like one with Hashem, the answer, the prayer gets answered immediately. Likewise, says the Rebbe, you can also apply this idea in the object, meaning in the prayer itself. When the prayer is something that concerns, it's of such a type that concerns not just a closeness to Hashem, it's not just about the Shechina, but it's actually one with the Shechina. It is actually davuk, it is cleaving, it is like actually one object with the Shechina, then that prayer gets answered more swiftly, more immediately. It says the Rebbe, based on this, will appreciate why the Medrash, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, chose specifically these three prayers from all the prayers of tzaddikim, as we asked, why only these three? Because in these three prayers, each one of them is concerning and brings out the connection between godliness and us, the connection between the Shechina and the world. Let's start, not in the same order, but let's start with Shlomo HaMelech. What was Shlomo's thing about? Building the Beis HaMikdash. What was the Beis HaMikdash? That was the revelation of the Shechina in this world. Right? As Hashem said, build the Beis HaMikdash, v'shochanti b'seichom, and I will dwell amongst them. So this is what it's about. It was about bringing the Shechina and connecting it to the world. What is Moshe Rabbeinu? Moshe Rabbeinu said, with this, what's going to happen now, you're going to know that Hashem sent me to be your prophet. He sent me to you. Again, it's connecting the Shechina to the world, revealing the connection of the Shechina to the world. And Eliezer is the idea of Nisui Yitzchak v'Rivka, the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka. These three things represent the revelation, as we're going to explain, the revelation of godliness in the world, to people, and through the Torah. The revelation in the world. Although, indeed, how did it happen in actuality? It happened through the Beis HaMikdash. I'm not, although the revelation of godliness in the world happened through the Beis Hamikdash, as we said. Remember, we mentioned in the introduction, people came to the Beis Hamikdash, they actually saw godliness. Through all the miracles that took place there, they saw godliness. They not only believed, not only had faith that there's a presence of godliness, they saw it, they felt it. Then you have the revelation of the Shekhinah, of godliness to people. How does that come about? Through the concept of Nevuah, through prophecy. As it says in the prophet Amos, it says, Gila soidoy lavada v'nevinim. That what is the idea of prophecy? Hashem reveals his secret. That means, what is his secret? His essence, himself. He reveals it to his servants, the prophets. And as the Rambam says, the Rambam establishes that this is one of the fundamentals of our faith. To know, to believe that Hashem reveals himself through the prophets. And of course, this is a unification, bringing together the person and Hashem. Right? This goes through the prophet, that the prophet becomes one with Hashem, revealing, so to speak, Hashem's secret. Hashem chooses to reveal a secret through him, and through him, Hashem's word becomes known. This is what Moshe Rabbeinu said, that with this, what's going to happen, you're going to know that Hashem sent me. This wasn't a means of proving that the Torah that Moshe gave was true, but primarily the prophecy aspect of Moshe Rabbeinu. And then the third thing, Torah, as we know, it says, Uraisa v'kuchabrichu kulachat. Hashem and the Torah are all one. This is the ultimate unity. And this is what's expressed in the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka. How so? We know the Chazal tell us, Yofa sichoson shel avdei oveis mitarason shel banim. That the Torah actually cherishes the small talk, so to speak, of the servants of the oveis even more than the Torah of the children. Where do we see it? Because in the story of Eliezer, the Torah actually repeats the narrative again in detail. Doesn't just sum it up; it repeats it in absolute detail. Whereas many laws in the Torah are derived not even from a word, but from an extra letter. The Torah doesn't seem to have to give the luxury of spending, so to speak, extra words, extra sentences, certainly not. Not even extra words, sometimes extra letters or just extra nuance. So this tells us that there's something very unique and a connection between the, quote, talk of the servants of our patriarchs to the Torah. In other words, the fact that the Chazal compare it and say this is greater tells us that there is a comparison. They're in the same category. What does that mean? Indeed, Chassidus explains that the idea of the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka, this is in general, this brings out the whole idea of the Torah. This is the concept of the Torah. How so? How does this bring out the general concept of the Torah, the general idea, the general accomplishment of the effect of the Torah? So we know, as we said in the introduction, Matan Torah, what was the whole objective of Hashem revealing himself on Har Sinai and Matan Torah? Was to take away that divide, to remove the Gzeira, that the Elyonim and the Tachtonim, the elevated realm and the lower realm cannot mix. What does that mean? In plain simple words, that the Torah effect that you could take the most elevated thing from the greatest heights and bring it down, and it permeates and connects with the very, very lowest. This is, in history, this was expressed the very first time. This actually happened the very first time in the Torah with the marriage of Rivka and Yitzchak. Think about it. Who was Yitzchak? Think about what elevated place he came from. He's the son of Avrohom Avinu. He had a bris milah, the first one to have a bris milah at 8 days old. And now, where is he now? At what point in his life? After the whole Akedah, after the special Nisayon, when he became now in the status of an Oila Tmima. He's now the God of Eretz Yisrael. Now let's look at Rivka. She's the daughter of Besulel. She's the sister of Lavan. And where is she coming from? A despicable place, which is not even in Eretz Yisrael, Padan Aram, a place full of cheaters. Now, these two, they came together and they become one. This is the idea of Matan Torah. This is in contrast, for example, to the marriage of Avram and Sarah, because at Avram and Sarah, although they were very holy, very lofty, but when they got married, Avram was still before his bris, And where was he? Where was it? It was in the house of his father, Terach, before he did Shuvah, and so on and so forth. And since Masei Avos Siman Labanim, whatever our Avos, the patriarchs did, this is a simon, this is a sign and a trailblazer for us, later for his descendants. So through this marriage, this connection of the Elyonim and Tachtainim, later comes about Matan Torah. Now we can appreciate why Eliezer's prayer was answered even before, or more swift or more quicker than the prayers of Moshe and Shlomo. Although the prayers of Moshe and Shlomo were also regarding matters that unify Hashem in the world, the Shekhinah in the world, but the unification, the unity that was prevalent by the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka, since it represents the idea of Torah, is far greater than that, even than of Nevuah, of prophecy in the Beis HaMikdash. Why? Because in the Beis HaMikdash and prophecy, although certainly there is a unity, like we said before, but still, think about it. What is the unity about? What kind of unification is it? It's two separate things which come together. You have the word of Hashem and you have man, which is not inherently one. You have a place, which is a Gashmistic place, and now Kedusha was permeated into it, thus the Beis HaMikdash and the holiness that's there. But it's not inherently one, it's two things that came together. And therefore, what is the result of that? That these two things, since they're two separate things that unified, it's not the ultimate unification, and therefore there are differences in time and space. For example, the prophet. You cannot compare the prophet before he received the prophecy, while he's receiving the prophecy, to how he is after he received the prophecy. There are shinuyim, there are changes. Likewise with the Beis HaMikdash. It's true, as we said in the introduction, that the holiness remains on that site, but still you cannot compare the effect of when the Beis HaMikdash was actually standing before it was destroyed to now when it's not standing there. Now we don't experience the same experience that they had then while the Beis HaMikdash was standing. We don't see the miracles and so on. So the bottom line, since the unity with the Shekhinah and the object with which it's unifying itself are two separate things, therefore the unity was not a totality. It was not in its fullest. But the unity that comes through Torah, since Torah to begin with is one thing with Hashem, therefore it's the ultimate unity that remains forever and ever and ever. And therefore, what do we see? That the unity of Torah, the effect that it has in the world is, number one, as it says in the Soyar, Yisrael uraisa v'kuchabrichu kol echad, that through Torah we become mamish one with Hashem. And number two, we know that the existence of the world is contingent on Torah. So it actually, it's the ultimate unity. Without it, there's no world. Without it, Hashem and the Shekhinah and the energy of God does not come into the world. And now we can appreciate why Eliezer's prayer was answered more in a much swifter manner than even the prayers of Moshe and Shlomo. You see, when the response to the prayer comes after the completion of the prayer, that's an indicator that the one who's praying, the person, and the thing that he's praying about, and whom he's praying to, Hashem, are two separate things. The person or the thing you're praying about and Hashem are two separate things. You combine it together. But when the answer comes, quote, before you end the prayer, that means that you completed the prayer. That means that the person and Hashem, or the thing you're praying about, as we explained in the Sicha, and Hashem are really all one thing. Another thing to add to this, in Chassidus it's explained on this pasuk that we were discussing, by he terem kil daber, before he even finished saying his prayer, that he was answered, that in the hashra selakus, meaning in the emanation of godly energy, there are two modes. And we say this pasuk every day in the morning. We say Hasholeach im rosei oretz, that Hashem sends His word to the earth, meaning He sends His energy, He sends His blessings to the word. But notice the word sends. What does sends mean? It's like when you send something, you send a parcel, you send mail, and it has to go through a process, and it has to travel, so to speak. What does this mean in Hasidic terms? That it has to go through the process of Seder Hishtalshelus. And therefore there's some duration of time. It takes time to go from one level to another level to another until it manifests itself into the blessing, the desired blessing that the person prayed for. Then there is the second half of the verse, Ad Meheira Yoretz Tavare, that his word runs swiftly. What does that mean? It skips over Seder Ishtalshalos. Why is this so? Says the Rebbe, the difference is where it's coming from. When you have a Sheleach Imra Seyaretz, true, it's coming from a great high source in godliness, but it's coming from such a point in Elkus that has a shaykhis, that has some connection to Ishtalshalos, and therefore has to go through the process, the order of Ishtalshalos, of the proper evolution of the different levels. Whereas when it comes to Ad Meherias Devarei, this is an indicator that this tefillah affected, that it comes from such a high point in godliness that there is no obstruction whatsoever. It doesn't have to go through any process whatsoever. It skips over the entire Seder Ishtalshalos. And with this we can appreciate these three prayers. All three of them, quote, reached a very, very high point that was higher than Seder Ishtalshalos. And therefore, they were answered right away. However, Eliezer was answered even quicker, because there's another point over here, there's another caveat. And that is, what was Eliezer praying about? Yitzchak. Yitzchak is Gevura. Typically, we translate Gevura to mean severity, but Gevura means also strength, power, energy. When something comes with Gevura, it comes much swifter. When something comes through Gevura, there's an extra force pushing it, and therefore, according to Chassidus, his prayers were answered even quicker, terem, even before, and more swifter than even the prayers of Moshe and Shlomo, although in general, they're all in the same category of those who reach to a higher level in Elkus, even higher than Ishtalshalos.